D-Day in Odessa. Ever since the first few hours of the war, the specter of a Russian naval invasion has hung over the Ukrainian port city. In fact, one of the first few reports I saw on the night when the Russian invasion began was of explosions in Odessa, swiftly followed by rumors of Russian soldiers in the streets setting up checkpoints. These turned out to be Ukrainian National Guardsmen, but despite no obvious or apparently overt attempt to invade the city from the sea, the idea and the fear persists. Why is this? In part, of course, it is the justifiable trepidation of a population that has already been attacked by cruise missiles coming in from the sea. But more important to the idea of a Russian naval invasion, again, one that has been prevalent even since before the war started, is the potential long-term crippling damage that the loss of Odessa could do to Ukraine. As things stand right now, with Crimea in Russian hands and Mariupol all but fallen, Odessa is the only port city still in Ukrainian hands. And if it is lost, an enormous portion of the Ukrainian economy simply vanishes. Odessa moves between 30 to 40 million tons of cargo every year, including grain shipments, which makes up 19% of Ukraine's export economy. Thus, if Russia could transform Ukraine into a landlocked nation via conquest, it wouldn't even need to win a war. Just sit back and watch as the economy shrinks year by year. And hand in hand with economic regression comes, of course, civil instability. Now, this isn't a complete given. Economic aid from the West, assuming interest persists for years, unlikely, could certainly help a great deal, but even so, the damage to Ukraine's finances would be severe and long-lasting. An additional benefit that makes the prospect of a naval invasion alluring is the close proximity of Odessa to the nation of Transnistria. Now, if you've never heard of this nation, then I would hardly be surprised, as it kinda sorta isn't really actually a nation. Back in November 1990, a civil war-level conflict broke out in Moldova. This has since been known as the Transnistria War, and it resulted in the creation of a breakaway state, Transnistria, whose autonomy was de facto secured in 1992 by a ceasefire agreement. A funny little state, Transnistria, is basically a Soviet-era time capsule, and a very, very good friend of Vladimir Putin's Russia, which incidentally has been maintaining a peacekeeping force in Transnistria ever since the 1992 ceasefire. And, well, Russia does have a bit of a history when it comes to attacking with peacekeeping forces via the territory of allied nations. Finally, even a raid against Odessa rather than a full-scale invasion might draw Ukrainian troops away from their current drive on Kherson, where the Russian occupying troops are doing some very strange things in the city, like apparently shipping in enormous Soviet-era statues of Lenin, whilst also beginning work on introducing the ruble as the official currency. There have also been a lot of rumors swirling around that a people's referendum is going to be held in the region, where the choices undoubtedly will be to either secede from Ukraine today or to secede from Ukraine tomorrow, much like what happened in Donbass and Luhansk. If true, this would be a propaganda victory for Putin, where he could potentially declare the liberation of the brave people of Kherson from the fascist thugs in Kiev. And so obviously, the Ukrainians retaking the city would look pretty bad. So there are both short and long-term advantages for why Russia might be pondering a naval invasion. But now that you've talked a bit about the potential reasons, let's move on from the why to the how. Can Russia even hope to stage a successful naval invasion of Odessa at this point? To answer that, we first need to figure out if a naval invasion is even logistically possible. As in, can Russia physically move troops from their bases and deposit them onto the beaches of Odessa? And yes, Yes, they can. In fact, the Black Sea Fleet was reinforced just a little over 2 weeks before the war to enhance this very ability. The Black Sea Fleet at the start of the conflict have 2 Tapir-class landing ships, 4 Rapucha-class landing ships, and a further 5 Rapucha classes and 1 Ivan Gren class seconded to them from the Baltic and Northern Fleet. However, on the 24th of March, one of the Tapir classes was struck by something. Possibly a Ukrainian Tochka U-BRBM missile was at port in Berdyansk. This ship seems to have, judging by satellite imagery, sunk, with reports suggesting that the crew deliberately flooded the vessel to counter heavy fires. And now it is resting straight keel down in shallow waters, so could probably be rescued, but that's not going to happen in the time frame we're talking about. There were also reports and videos circulating showing possible damage to a pair of Rapucha classes as well, but for the purposes of this video we are going to assume they are still operational. The boats are of course just a means to an end, however, so what kind of carry capacity are we looking at here? The largest landing craft is the remaining Tapir. It can transport and deploy some 20 main battle tanks and a potential 300 soldiers directly onto a beach via a forward landing ramp. There are Rapuchas that are pinched smaller and can deploy either 12 MBTs directly onto a beach, much like the Tapir, but the Rapuchas are more likely to deploy amphibious APCs and support vehicles directly into the water, before covering their approach to the landing zones with their twin 122mm rocket launchers. The numbers I have found vary, but they can independently deploy between 12 to 25 APCs along with supporting unmounted infantry. And finally, we have the lone Ivan Gren class. This type is supposed to eventually replace the Rapuchas and can carry 12 tanks or a whopping 36 APCs along with 300 infantry. All told, assuming every ship is loaded to the gun walls with everything they can carry, APCs with infantry aboard and supporting troops, the Black Sea Fleet could deploy the rough equivalent of a 3-battalion strength brigade, circa 3,000 to 4,000 men. The real number would probably be closer to 1,500 to 2,000 fighting soldiers, with the rest of the transport capacity dedicated to utility transports like the MTLB or fire support vehicles like the 120mm mortar-armed Nona, or simply more tanks. Add in armoured elements on top of that and you have a couple of reinforced battalions, not fully BTGs, mind you, as they will not have full access to the battalion tactical group's usual toolbox. Nevertheless, this is far from an insignificant force, but it is also a lot of eggs in half a dozen baskets. The loss of a single transport at sea to enemy action could potentially wipe out damn near 10% of the landing force. And with the recent loss of the Black Sea Fleet's flagship, the Moskva, protecting this landing fleet is going to be a daunting task. As of now, in terms of surface fleet combat vessels, the Black Sea Fleet appears to have 3 active and present guided missile frigates, 2 modern Admiral Grigorovich classes, and 1 recently refitted Krivak class from the 80s. It also has 4 guided missile corvettes and 3 to 5 Tarantula-class missile boats. In addition to this, of lesser concerns when it comes to a full seaborne invasion, also comes a variety of patrol boats, a few anti-submarine warfare ships, and some minesweepers, though none of these are likely to play much of a major role during the landing operations, besides potentially the minesweepers. Also of note are the 3, possibly 4 upgraded Kilo-class diesel submarines in the area, which, if nothing else, could contribute with further cruise missile capabilities. Let us start then with analysing the frigates. The old Krivak class has little to offer, as it's only armed with anti-ship missiles and anti-submarine warfare missiles, along with a single 76mm cannon. The Ukrainian Navy isn't, let's just put it like that. And the Krivak also has next to no point defense beyond a pair of Odessa SAM launchers, whose effectiveness against incoming Ukrainian ASM is questionable. The two Admiral Grigorovich ships are a fair bit better off, and will have to form the bulk of the fleet's offense and defense. With 24 vertical launch Still 1 cells and 2 AK-630 PD guns, these ships have the ability to, in theory at least, begin intercepting anti-ship missiles at 50 kilometers, whilst also having at least a snowball's chance in hell of intercepting a missile that gets past the first barrage. Now, an intercept range of 50 kilometers is far from an ideal range when intercepting a weapon coming in at something like 600, 700, 800 kilometers per hour. Which brings up another recent topic. Ideally, missile interception should have first and foremost been the job of the Slava-class cruiser, the Moskva, with her S-300 missiles, which can engage at 3 times the range of the Admiral Grigorovich's. But, as most of you will know by now, the Moskva was sunk by, precisely so, Ukrainian anti-ship missiles. In an event that shocked and surprised everyone, as it really should not have happened, but I feel like we're saying that a lot in this war. The Slava was engaged and successfully sunk by a shore-launched ASM. Now, the Slava carries 64 launchers for its S-300s alongside sophisticated e-war and radar systems. Even a full battery launch, 16 to 24 Ukrainian Neptune missiles should be within the Slava's theoretical tolerance. At the very least, she should have had a fighting chance, and yet from what we have seen, bearing in mind the situation is far from fully explained, a single 4-tube launcher hit with 2 and missed with 2 missiles. How? Well, that's the difficult part, as everything right now is mostly speculations, but supposedly the Moskva's main fire control radar, its most powerful detection and tracking tool, was being used to observe a flight of TB2 drones to the ship's front. Now, the fire direction radar is normally used to guide in the S-300 missiles and has a limited cone of vision, about 180 to 200 degrees. And so, if, for some absurd reason, he was busy keeping an eye on a pair of drones, they would have no hope in ever-living hell of actually doing any real damage to a Slava-class cruiser. Then a group of anti-ship missiles coming in from the ship's flank. Well, it turns out they have every chance of hitting the warship. Normally, you would also have thought that the ship's 360 degrees radar would have detected them, but somehow they too failed to detect the incoming missiles. Supposedly due to stormy seas, according to Russian reports. At the same time, however, there are claims that the sea was actually perfectly calm at the time, coming from Western sources, so who even knows. But regardless of what happened, the Black Sea Fleet's best air and missile defense ship is happily blubbing away underneath the waves and will not be available. Next up, then, we have the frigates, with 3 Boyan Ms most likely to accompany the fleet. These are equipped with 1 Pantsir specialized anti-missile system with a range of 20 kilometers for its missile interception, and it's also armed with twin autocannons as well for point-blank defense and 2 AK-630 PDs. We will have a brief mention of land attack weapons as well later on, but for the moment let's move on to the Tarantulas, as they have got practically no real anti-missile defense. Well, they can defend themselves with two AK-630s, but, well, as cool as the rotary-barreled cannons are, their realistic chance of shooting down an incoming missile is not negligible, but not great either. All in all, it is not a terrible shield the Black Sea Fleet has here, though it is lacking one of its most important component parts. Ideally, air and anti-missile defense should have been working like a layered onion type deal, with the Slava class providing long-range protection and an initial intercept salvo. Then the Admiral Grigoroviches would engage whatever missile slipped through the cracks, and as a final fallback, the Buyan M's with their ships' Panzer systems would knock down whatever remained. Meanwhile, the ships would also have a final oh god, oh shit, oh fuck weapon in the form of the AK-630 PDs. But what is the fleet defending itself against? That is an equally important, if not even more important question, and one that's a little bit hard to answer, as Ukraine's anti-ship missile system is very new. Almost a prototype still, as it only finished official development in 2021. We don't know how many batteries of these new weapon systems Ukraine has. They have ordered 18 launchers with 54 total planned, but we don't know how many have been delivered. We do know the rough makeup of a battery, however, with 6 launch vehicles, with 4 R360 Neptunes each, a command vehicle, an equally brand new Mineral U road mobile radar truck, and reloading vehicles, presumably for each of the launchers. So one battery could put out 24 weapons with a 6-second interval per weapon to allow the Mineral U to catch up, which will of course provide initial guidance until the weapons go self-guiding for the final approach. The efficiency of the system is a matter of much debate. Again, in theory, the Neptune system is not particularly impressive. They are subsonic and as such eminently interceptable, and travel at 10 to 15 meters above the sea for most of the approach, dipping down to 5 odd meters for the last spurt, well within the kill cone of an intercepting missile, and yet, whilst paper might say one thing, reality might be saying another, as was demonstrated with the Moskva. But even if it's not the best system in the world, with a range of 250 kilometers and with a Mineral U radar being allegedly capable of detecting ships at up to 600 kilometers, the Odessa invasion fleet would have to travel a painfully long way under the threat of attack. Since we don't know precisely where the launcher batteries are, it is impossible to truly estimate how long the invasion fleet might be exposed. But if we assume the shortest possible dash, with the Russian fleet having somehow snuck around Crimea and made it into the Karenitska Gulf, it would still have 130 plus kilometers to cross until it reaches Odessa. And at the top speed of the transport ships, which the rest of the fleet would obviously have to lag behind and protect, they would be moving at 18 knots, which means that the 130 kilometers journey would take approximately 4 hours. We know the Neptune battery carries enough missiles for 2 reloads, and we know it takes 15 minutes minimum to get them ready for launch and another 5 to 15 minutes to get them road mobile again. Furthermore, it would probably take at least an hour, probably more, to drive away to a safe distance, reload, and return to new firing positions. It wouldn't be impossible that a battery could get all 3 salvos off, but it'd be tight. On the other hand, Ukraine doesn't have that much coastline left to defend. Hey. Silver lining and all that, so all available batteries are likely to be covering Odessa. If we're thinking 3 batteries and say 2 salvos per battery, that's 144 Neptunes fired over the course of that 4-hour approach. Ouch. And to make that sting just a little bit more, the Russian fleet would have 48 medium to long-range intercept missiles on the Admiral Grigoroviches, 12 medium to short ranges on the Krivak, and 24 Panzer missiles on the Boyan M's for a total of 84. That's a pretty big problem. Now, some of these systems are theoretically reloadable, but the big VLS launchers on the Admiral Grigoroviches are not, at least not at sea. Now, if we were to add the 64 missiles of the sunk Slava and its 40 short to medium missiles, we would have had 188. It's still a bit of a sketchy ratio, but you can now see how much the loss of the Moskva again hurt the Black Sea Fleet, as they would have to hope that a lot of Neptunes miss, and they don't miss at all. Otherwise, the Russian fleet would be absolutely decimated. And I do have an admission to make here. I don't think there's any real chance Russia is going to try this naval invasion. But saying that at the start of the video would be anticlimactic, wouldn't it? That might have you click away. Hold on a second, I still got a little bit more. Because here's the thing, with the Moskva there, it would have had a chance. Not amazing chance, but a chance. Like, I would have risked it with the Moskva. Without it, the risk almost certainly outweighs the gains, but it's no fun to quit here. So, hypothetically, if Russia was run by a madman with very little care for his people, what could the commanders of the Black Sea Fleet do to have a chance? Because it is not completely hopeless. Firstly, the Black Sea Fleet's Kilo-class submarines should be loaded with frogmen rather than torpedoes. Luckily, the 102nd PDSS detachment, the Russian equivalent of the US Navy SEALs, are stationed in Sevastopol. Now, unlike in the movies, these special operations lads aren't there to run screaming into burning buildings with an AK-47 each hand. Instead, they are reconnaissance and infiltration specialists, which is precisely what we need. Of course, deploying these operatives deep behind enemy lines carries a great deal of risk, but as we know, the Neptune launchers must operate within 25 or so kilometers of the coastline. And there aren't that many major roads in this part of Ukraine. This in terms means that there is an absolute envelope inside of which the launchers must operate, and therefore an opportunity to locate them in transit, or better yet, stationary. This is far from guaranteed, of course, but if a battery can be found, then the Black Sea Fleet does carry a lot of 3M54 caliber cruise missiles, with plenty of range and ample warheads to turn a bunch of soft-skinned trucks into scrap, especially if guided onto target by a team of nearby spotters. Beyond trusting in Lady Luck and the skills of the Russian commandos, however, the most vulnerable part of the Neptune's battery is its radar, as radar is a double-edged sword. If the Mineral U can detect ships from 600 kilometers, then its own radar signature, as in the waves it sends out to find something, can be detected from 800 kilometers or more. Naturally, I don't think the Ukrainians would be dumb enough to be banging away on active radar willy-nilly, but if you want to fire those fancy missiles, you're going to have to start it up at least for a while. And in that period, Russian anti-radar weapons could detect and destroy them, if the Russians have learned how to use the radar suppressors yet, and there is very little indication of this, honestly. A bigger problem too is that Ukraine cheats quite a bit, as NATO and US detection information tends to, by happy coincidence, find its way into Ukrainian headquarters. Like, for example, this cheery little camper. Ah, that feel when the opposition turns off fog of war. Basically, this means that the Mineral U doesn't need to be on to find the enemy. They can listen in on their quote-unquote allies' communication to do that. So they only need to turn on the radar to lock them up and provide initial guidance to the Neptune missiles. Even then, the launchers could of course be detected by Russian radar on the ships or from the air if Russia would just deploy their goddamn AWACS already, and the launch site peppered with cruise missiles from the ships or TU bombers off the coast. Not a great option considering how rapidly the battery can grow road mobile, but at least it is an option. Honestly, unless the Russians get very lucky with infiltration efforts, the risk posed by the Neptune batteries to the current Black Sea fleet would probably preclude any major operation like this. But if we still go on further, could the invasion gain a foothold? Now this is a far more cheery prospect for the Russians, as yes, in fact I'm almost sure they could. Defending a beach directly with fortifications or strong points nearby the coast would be suicide against a modern fleet armed with rapid-fire hyper-precise cannons and cruise missile. Could the Russians keep the beach, however? Now that's a much bigger question. There is a lot of Ukrainian artillery gathered in and around Odessa, many of which will be in heavily reinforced dugouts. The various entrenchments that we've seen the Ukrainian civilians building on the beaches would almost certainly be completely useless, more of a way for the civilians themselves to feel like they're doing something, but there are many other ways to fight a war, and a significant artillery barrage onto the beaches would make life very difficult for the Russians. Furthermore, anti-tank guided missile launchers peppered out throughout the area and operated by people who either haven't been told their odds of survival or are willing to accept it, could inflict serious damage on the slow-moving amphibious transports as they're moving their way up through the swell towards the beaches. Now, presuming a landing to the immediate south or north of Odessa, the 2 or so Russian battalions might be facing off against 1, possibly 2 Ukrainian brigades, along with National Guard troops. And the Russians would absolutely need to seize at least part of the port facilities quickly, or risk severe logistical problems, forcing them to actually attack this numerically superior enemy. The landing ships can carry cargo too as well, and can deposit it onto the beaches, but would have to be unloaded virtually manually via truck. Even worse, the valuable transport ships would have to pass through the ASM gauntlet again and again and again, placing those transports at a great deal of risk. Now, with a port, a myriad of tricks are possible with which to bring in supplies, but without one, well, the neutral cargo ship flying a neutral flag, but unloading stuff via light transport directly to the Russian beaches would be pretty damn suspicious. As for the attack on Odessa proper, once more, if we assume the Neptune batteries have been neutralized, which is a bit of a stretch, but nevertheless, the Black Sea Fleet can provide extremely effective direct fire support whilst fairly safe from most retaliation, beyond the occasional artillery barrage here and there, which is unlikely to do too much damage. Even in such a favorable scenario, though, seeing the slow progress made in other cities across Ukraine and taking into consideration the Russian attacker will probably be outnumbered by the defenders, a quick attack and a quick victory is not looking good. And every day that the Russians are struggling to get a proper defensive line well and truly safely inland to protect the ships, that's another day that the Ukrainians have to bring in reinforcements and begin encircling a Russian force with very few options to try and retreat. It isn't looking great. at this stage either. What if Transnistria joined in then? Because we mentioned them earlier. They have a potential 4 brigades nearby. There you go, that's a significant number. Well, yes, kinda. The Transnistrian army consists of about 5,000 regulars and 20,000 weekend warriors, armed and equipped to a standard more reminiscent of a World War II infantry brigade than even a Cold War one. There are also 1,500 Russian troops in Transnistria, the peacekeeping forces, which are sometimes designated as a battalion tactical group, but really, Transnistria is viewed as a vacation posting, and most of the heavy Russian assets have been evacuated over the years due to various treaties. The Transnistrian front has some relatively serious numbers, and a rapid, unexpected attack could do a lot of damage to the Ukrainian rear, but I wouldn't hope for much from Transnistria past the first few days of a surprise offensive. On that note as well, this is supposedly a Transnistrian newspaper. It was sent to me by Artemis, thank you very much by the way, on March the 1st. The newspaper, as you can see, is dated March the 2nd. And according to my buddy Bloodscream, who's a Russian speaker, the paper talks about a bloody terrorist attack on Transnistria, and asks Russia to please come help. Foreshadowing 101, but the Russians aren't the only ones that might be getting unexpected quote-unquote allies, as there's been a lot of activity from US Army personnel stationed in Romania in particular, moving up to the border between Ukraine and Romania, and also apparently moving around in Moldova as well. And these US Army troops are likely to try and interfere with the Russian operations in indirect ways, like, accidentally spewing out some radar interference and jamming in their general direction, for example, or otherwise making their presence extraordinarily obnoxious, locking onto their ships with their own weapons, locking onto aircraft and so on, just generally being annoying, and maybe even hoping that a stray caliber cruise missile comes roaring their way as well. It would be excellent justification for a bit more of a wide intervention, after all. All in all, it doesn't seem like a particularly good idea. The potential rewards for seizing Odessa are vast, sure. Russia does have the capabilities to land troops. It does have the troops available, as there are several large formations attached to the southern district that are not currently in active operations in Ukraine. They could theoretically even make it to the beaches with the defenses they still have, although it would be, gosh, damn dangerous. Some further aid from air assets would undoubtedly help, but it would also run the risk of running afoul of further Ukrainian anti-air systems, which the Russians so far have proven remarkably inept at shutting down. But even if Russia could pull all of this off, looking at their effectiveness in land offensives so far, they are very unlikely to be able to capture Odessa. Odessa is not unprepared. This wouldn't come as a shock to them. They have already fortified the city. There are already National Guard, or territorial defense forces, as the Ukrainians call them, in the city. There may even be 2 full brigades nearby, keeping a close look on Transnistria. And at the very least, there's likely to be 1 brigade. And then you've got several Ukrainian brigades pushing the offensive against Kherson. It wouldn't take long for them to redeploy en masse towards Odessa. The Russians would be at a heavy disadvantage very, 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 very quickly, and their only opportunity to evacuate, should they feel the need to do so, would have to be via the sea, as it seems, again, extremely unlikely that some sort of offensive would be able to be launched from Kherson and Odessa simultaneously to join up with one another, especially now as more and more forces are being moved eastward to begin aiding with a possible attempt at yet another encirclement move in the east, with Russian forces moving from the north and the south simultaneously. So, as visually interesting as it would be to see a modern-day D-Day, I don't see it happening, and if it were to happen, I would predict a one-sided massacre, to be honest. So, I don't think it's gonna happen, and I hope it isn't gonna happen. Anywho, as always, thank you all very much for watching these little theoretical videos of mine. As always, I am not a military professional, I am just a person with a burning passion for all things military and military history related, and these are my uneducated musings on the topic. If you like the video, please do consider leaving a like and a comment in the section down below, as that is what the YouTube algorithm likes. And until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Have a good day.